We'll get to your phone calls coming up. He's Albert Breer, the Monday morning quarterback, the senior NFL reporter. Always great to see him. Let's start with a State of the Union with each of the teams last night. Let me start with the undefeated Buffalo Bills. What do you think so far?
I think Josh Allen's probably, and look, it's really early, but Josh Allen's probably the MVP of the league through 3 weeks. And I think it's a result of, and I don't want to make this like Josh versus Stephon Diggs, but you know, I can remember Tom Brady winning an MVP the year they traded away Randy Moss. And I can remember talking to Brady about that. They traded for Deion Branch right after. And it was like it wasn't like he was happy to see Randy go, but it was all right. Like now I can kind of just go out there and play point guard, and all five guys are alive on every route. And it was sort of freeing to him. And I think you can see that with Josh now, right? Like where he doesn't have to look over every 3 or 4 plays to make sure that the number one guy has got the ball. So he's playing point guard. And when you add that to his like otherworldly ability to make off schedule plays, to run, to get the ball downfield, I think you're seeing a really complete player now. And I think you got to give Sean McDermott credit for the job they've done on defense too. Like their defensive front's really impressive with Ed Oliver, and Greg Rousseau is playing really well. But that back seven, like no Matt Milano, Tre'Davious White's gone. They lost Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. And so to be playing as well as they are on the back end of their defense, the back seven, I think it's a real credit to the front office, to Sean McDermott, to Bobby Babich, to all the people that have kind of contributed to developing young talent there, because they lost a lot of guys on the back end of that defense.
Yeah, you bring up a couple of great points there, that you don't have that number one receiver to go to, because RG3 joined us last hour, and he said that Mahomes maybe became a better quarterback when Tyreek Hill left, because he was able to kind of distribute wherever he wanted to. Yep. You don't have to keep somebody happy all the time. And then talking about that defense, I know we're portraying Buffalo as kind of a wounded animal of they're not that good. They're kind of like playing a little bit better than we thought. But and we said this at the beginning of the year, because they lost so many players, maybe we really realize the value of Josh Allen if the team is successful, that he doesn't have the star power that other teams have. Therefore, he's probably going to get extra credit.
Is it not exactly the situation Mahomes was in 2 years ago when they traded Tyreek, right? Like, and now all of a sudden, I mean, and it's the reality of having a quarterback on such a big contract, right? Is that you have to build a different way. And generally it takes a year or two after the guy gets paid to sort of feel the effects of that. But, what ends up happening, Dan, is like, okay, like, so now at the top of our roster, we can pay a few less guys. And we're going to have to fill holes through the draft instead of filling them, with a $5 or a $10 million free agent. And, I think Mahomes has been awesome the last 2 years, despite, the revolving door at receiver that they've dealt with. And he really showed his value and how they played the last couple of years. He like bought time for a young defense to really grow up and come into its own. And, I think we're seeing the same sort of dynamic in Buffalo with Josh Allen now.
I know that nobody wants to say it. Travis Kelce doesn't look good.
Yeah.
And he's a given. Now, granted, he might be almost sliding into that Gronk role of don't worry about the regular season, just worry about the postseason. Can you factor in his offseason? Should that be factored in with him not playing? Is it fair to do that?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think
is
all
he
these
in shape?
guys. Yeah, I think he is. I mean, I, one thing that was really interesting in talking to Chiefs people in the summer was like he is a guy who kind of works himself into shape. They were over the moon with the way he was working over the summer. He didn't miss a single practice, and they tried to give him vet days while they were up in St. Joe, Missouri at their training camp, one of the few teams that still goes away and lives like the dorm life, and like they tried to give him days off and they tried to pace him and he didn't want it. And, so he really pushed himself through training camp. I think Kelce's at the phase of his career. And we saw this last year too. Like, I don't think he looked the same in September and October or November of last year. And like, he just had a way of finding that's something he needed for December and January and February. And like his knowledge of the game, his experience really came into play when they got into the playoffs. and he got what he needed to make the big plays in the end. And I do think that they feel like they're better around him this year too. Like Rashee Rice,
Yeah.
in year two has looked like he's taken a pretty big step. Xavier Worthy adds something they haven't had the last couple of years on offense. The hope was that they were going to get Hollywood Brown back. And the whole vision for the offense, Dan, and this has been the vision for Brett Veach and for Andy Reid going back to March and April, was it's sort of like you got the two guys on the outside who can fly down the field in Hollywood and Xavier Worthy, and they're opening up space underneath for Kelce and Rice to have all this space to operate. And obviously that hasn't really come to fruition because Hollywood's been hurt and because Xavier's a rookie still learning his way. But that could be another thing that, like, if Hollywood can find his way back on the field, and it's no sure thing, but if Hollywood does find his way back onto the field and Xavier comes of age a little bit, you still could see that vision come to life, which I think would help, which I think ultimately would help Kelce a lot.
State of the Union for the Commanders is what?
Well, you got to be really happy with how the quarterback played, right? Like I think that they picked the right guy out of that crew that went to Topgolf in April. Yeah, I think Jaden looks so comfortable. I remember talking to a couple of their coaches, talking to DQ and Cliff and some of the guys back in the summer, the day I was at their camp, and I said to them, like, the word that comes to mind watching him practice, this was just practice, was how smooth he looks. Never looked out of place, right? Like, and just looked like he was doing the right things consistently and getting the ball where it needed to go. And everything looks just so fluid with him. And I think you're seeing that now. And I think this is something we sort of have to remember with Caleb. Jaden was in college for 5 years. Jaden was a multi-year starter at two different major programs in two different major conferences. He's seen a lot. And he just, I think, as a result of all of that experience, and we saw this with Brock Purdy, who was another high volume guy in college, right? Is that, like, Jaden Daniels looks like he's prepared to be a professional football player in every single way. And Caleb's 2 years younger than Jaden and doesn't have the amount of experience that Jaden has, and I think that that's sort of shown. Jaden looks to me like the type of guy who has already got a lot of stuff figured out for a rookie, and I'm almost as impressed with, like, the things he was doing before the big throw to Terry McLaurin down the sideline, like knowing when to pull the ball down and scramble, knowing when to check it down. He looks like he's got incredible command for a rookie. And I think the other thing that sticks out about the Commanders is just how hard they're playing. Like, if you've been watching football as long as you and I have, you can see it. Like, the energy a team plays with, right? When they're really bought in and they really know what they're doing. And when you see it from a first year coach's team, I think it really means something. And we're seeing that with Dan Quinn's Commanders right now. They still have major holes. I mean, and that's the thing that's most remarkable about this, right? Like, they still are going to have to address the offensive tackle position. They still need, like, a war daddy edge rusher. They still have a lot to sort through at corner. Those are three premium positions that they really have some problems to sort through at, right? But I mean, they got the quarterback right, and everybody's playing hard, and they've been able to manage those weaknesses, which is really hard to do. I think the arrow's pointing way up on the Commanders right now.
Talking to Albert Breer, the Monday morning quarterback. Would you rather be a Bengal fan or a Jaguar fan today?
Bengal fan, because I know it's going to work out. I mean, Joe Burrow played fine. Like, I know people are going to make this about Burrow and the wrist and maybe even his frosted tips there, but I think Joe has played better week to week, right? Like, and he's knocked the rust off. Joe Burrow is going to be Joe Burrow. We saw, I think, a very real version of Jamar Chase last night. He looked great too. Higgins is going to get more comfortable, so they're going to score points. My concern with the Bengals is on defense. And can the defense get up to a level that they don't need to be top of the league, but can they be a top 10 or 15 defense, which is what they've been under Lou Anarumo the last few years. And I think a lot of that's going to come down to being able to generate a pass rush and getting Trey Hendrickson back to his level and figuring out the corner position. I mean, the guy who was in coverage on that McLaurin touchdown was Dax Hill, who's really a safety playing corner. So, like, that, I think there are some real concerns. But in the end, like, I think because of the offense, because of Joe Burrow, Chase, Higgins, I think they're going to be there in the end. The Jaguars feel to me like, I mean, I don't know. I like, their core players are good, not great. And I think that that's sometimes in the NFL where you can get yourself in trouble, where like the highest paid players on your team or the highest drafted players on your team are just pretty good and not great. And I'm talking about like Christian Kirk and Tyson Campbell and Cam Robinson. Like they're good players, but are those like the core pieces of a champion? And those three guys I mentioned are all very highly paid, right? So it just feels to me like a team that doesn't have like this real strength to hang its hat on. And it needs Trevor Lawrence to be a superstar, and he just isn't one right now, you know? So I it feels to me a little bit like a franchise that may be in for another reset, you know? And I think they've got three very big weeks coming up here. I believe their next 3 weeks, they've got two division games, right? I think they play the Bears, but then they also play the Colts and the Texans. The Texans are this week. The Texans coming off of that loss. And then they go to London and play the Patriots. And that's obviously like a big game for ownership going over there. So if you have a winless team going over there, like these billionaires don't like being embarrassed. So I just, it feels like there's a lot on the line for a lot of people in that organization over the next few weeks.
So coaches in trouble, flirting with trouble.
Yeah, yeah, maybe.
So
And I like they're just a sneaky one with Belichick for me. I like Tony Khan has a really strong relationship with Bill Belichick, Shad's son, Tony. Um, to the point where, so when they hired Doug Marone, as like the full time when they removed the interim tag, what was that, 17, I think 2017, right? That was largely on the advice of Bill Belichick to do it. So Bill's had the ear of ownership in that place for a while now. And I just wonder if that's not rattling around in the heads of ownership there now, especially when you're building a new stadium, and not a new stadium, but you're renovating your stadium. And now, you've got like sponsorship to sell, you've got suites to sell, like all of that stuff, right? Do you need some more credibility? It's just there are some things that line up there where I wouldn't totally rule out. I wouldn't totally rule out that as a viable possibility for Belichick in 2025. And he does have a place, I think, right down the street. I guess right down I-95 there in South Florida too. So that wouldn't hurt either.
great to talk to you as always, Albert. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks, DP.
That's Albert Breer, Monday morning quarterback. Bill Belichick in the on-deck circle, perhaps.